Hello, welcome to Aviation 101 with Laura. Today we are here to talk about Jeppesen charts, one of my favorite topics to talk about, and we are going to focus on SIDs. And I am planning another video about stars, so you should check that out. It should be dropping in hopefully the next week or two, depending on how busy I am. But I also want to announce I have made some more course bundles on my website. One of them now is your Part 121, Part 135 Interview Prep plus Jeppesen. And I have added a new class, brand new, all about Jeppesen approaches and Jeppesen airport diagrams, very commonly asked items on interviews, and these classes will help you get ready. The class bundles are available, and when you buy the bundle, you get 3 months where you can just start the classes whenever you want during the 3-month period. Each class itself gives you 30 days access. So check them out on that link right there, and I will put a link in the video description. All right, on to the SIDs, standard instrument departures. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the whole detail of what this is. Essentially, in a nutshell, it is a way for us to have a organized flow of traffic departing an area and keep people from hitting obstacles as they leave the terminal area under instrument flight rules. So there are two types, if you will. We have the SID versus the vector SID. I mean, they're both SIDs, but when I tell you that, I'm going to show you both here. Okay, so this is your typical SID, which looks like a long line. It is coming out of an airport. This is for LaGuardia. Okay, I'm realizing that I put a star up here. Okay, correction. Let's go back and actually look at here is a SID that is a SID that leads to some various points. Okay, so here we have various points at the end of my arrival. All right, versus this type of thing, which is at LaGuardia. This is a vector SID. This vector SID ends at a variety of VORs or waypoints. Okay, so the difference, and the reason I got confused on this and I made this slide wrong, is because it does kind of look like this, except for this is a star, so there's a preview for the next video. Stars are about arrivals. SIDs are about departures. Okay, but a vector SID looks like this. So let's take a look in more detail at this. This is the LaGuardia departure, LaGuardia 7, and I'm going to go over here and kind of do a bunch of pointing out of features. So it is for New York. It is for LaGuardia. We've got our typical Jeppesen header up here at the top. And then you've got your name, the number. They just changed the number when they revised something about this departure. And this is how I would file it on a flight plan, LaGuardia 7.LaGuardia. Okay, and then it is for all the runways. Now, LaGuardia 7.LaGuardia is actually oversimplified on this, because if I want to use this departure and say, for example, I want to end up at Sparta, I can file that as SAX.LGA. Okay, or sorry, LGA 7. Whatever it's ending with, BDR for Bridgepoint. So we still have that number part, LGA 7 dot, and then fill in the blank of where you're going. Okay, so this is a SID that has got some various speed restrictions. We've got all kinds of information at the top. Let's start over here with the departure frequency for a New York departure. R parentheses means it has radar service available. Got the airport elevation, and then we have a bunch of notes making sure that we have these things available, like, for example, the Newell. If you want to end up at Newell, that is only for jet aircraft that are going to flight level 180 and above. Okay, so if we take a look at the whole departure, there's Newell. So if you're intending to do LGA 7 Newell, you better make sure you're only a jet aircraft. So this is not for any turboprop type aircraft. Okay. Now, this one is interesting. This is all to scale on my view here. This circle right here is my MSA. And if you recall from my video about Jeppesen charts before, or anything else you know about Jeppesen charts, an MSA, minimum safe altitude, minimum sector altitude, the FAA seems like it can't make up its mind. It says both interchangeably in all of its things. This is 25-mile radius, and it has various sectors. In this half, you'd want to be at 2100. or above, and this half 3100, and it is centered around the LaGuardia VOR. Okay. This is all to scale, like I said, other than if it says it's not to scale. For example, right here over at Pottstown VOR, that is not to scale. Okay. But all these other items on this chart are to scale. All right. Now, this is a very interesting one because it says for initial climb, you have to look at the inset, and we have a what's called a Jeppesen ball flag. We can look at that. Let me zoom in. So my initial climb information is provided right here in visual form by Jeppesen. So let's start with like the Flushing climb. Okay. So if you're told by ATC to do the Flushing climb, okay, so we've got an initial climb. We have text instructions, Flushing climb on heading 134 degrees to 2.5 DME from LaGuardia VOR. Then make a climbing left turn to a heading of 050, maintain 5,000. So here you have 050 heading, Flushing climb. Now, notice all these little arrows at the end. That means after that, you are going to get vectors from ATC because this whole SID is a vector SID, and they're giving me vectors to whatever it is I'm going to after that climb. They have just so many climbs here out of LaGuardia that they don't want to tell you all this information every single time because that would be really tiresome for ATC with this many departures. Okay, so they just type it all out and they tell you what to do. Again, like Madspeth climb is turbojets only. Okay, so don't plan to do that. All right, if you're not a turbojet, they shouldn't give it to you. Okay, then you also, I wanted to point out that some of these say expect, so like runway, this one on this climb here from runway 31, okay? So if you take off runway 31, it's just climb heading 314 degrees or as assigned by ATC, maintain 5,000. It just kind of says expect to go on course leaving 6,000, but it's like a, generally this happens, okay? Some of these are actual limits, like this Coney climb, do not exceed 230 knots until intercepting the Canarsie VOR radial 043. And the Coney climb is a little bit more complicated and it's for turbojets only, so you would need to read all that and follow all that. I also want to point out over here, I have another video you can check out about takeoff minimums, but for example, these often you will read, so let's just look at the Flushing climb again. It says minimum climb of 283 feet per nautical mile to 300 feet, okay? So if you don't know what that's going to translate to for you, Jeppesen has a little table. Awesome. So 100 knots ground speed, if you're in a slow airplane like me, 283 feet per nautical mile works out to 472 feet per minute. No need to look it up anywhere. And Jeppesen is super nice. They've done there's no interpolating because they've taken all the various feet per nautical mile climb requirements from up here and done all the math for you. Love Jeppesen. Okay. Again, I really don't have time to unpack all these other little notes, the 402 1/4 thing, because you just have to go watch the takeoff minimums video to understand more about that. I do not have time here. Okay. Yeah. So this is an example of a vector SID. And like I said, you can go to any of these things depicted on here, VORs or various points. Okay. As long as you comply with the notes and you file it like LGA 7 dot, whatever it is you're going to. Cool. We also have in the top corner, do you notice this black arrow? That's pointing out the highest obstacle in this overview view. It's at 2,602 feet MSL. All these altitudes are on feet MSL. And notice also over here, we've got some lines going to various fixes. These are not any kind of a path you would specifically follow. They don't have any MEA. They don't have that information along it. This is just for reference. So you could identify Newell as 30 DME on the 264 degree radial from Sparta VOR. Okay, cool. All right, now let's go on to another example. So here is an example of an RNAV SID. This one is not a vector SID. And this one would be if you are departing, generally going westbound from Atlanta, because you can see everything funnels into NASA and then engineer, haha, cute. And then you could end up at Vulcan VOR or Y'all intersection or Chook. Cool. Notice over here, we've got a line. So from NASA to engineer, cute, you have 10,000, that would be your MEA, 4,300T, that's how Jeppesen is going to indicate your MOCA. Again, I have another video about that with all the en route things if you want to look that up for refresher. And it's 40.9 miles between NASA and engineer, and it's 274 degrees course. Then you see it goes on like to Vulcan, and here you see how you would file this if you wanted to end at Vulcan, NASA2.VUZ, Vulcan VOR. Or if you want to end at Chook, NASA2.Chook. Okay, so this is the example of where all of these can end. You could just end at NASA and go from there, okay? But you would file that as NASA2.NASA. This is usable by all the runways. I have to point out some other interesting things. So I noticed this big red ring, ARP. That's weird. So I looked into that. So again, because this is all to scale, this one's much more zoomed in. I mean, look at the size of the runways and Atlanta Airport here. This is your MSA, again, of 25 miles. And you do have a number in there of 3,100. So let's draw here. So yeah, here is my 25-mile radius. And weirdly, it is based just on the airport. It's not based on any sort of VOR or anything. And the MSA, it's again 25-mile radius, is 3,100. So here's another example of Atlanta with more like one of these vector SIDs. And again, you see that's the airport circle, and this is a 3,100 foot MSA in the circle, and that's a 25-mile radius. Okay, so we'll come back to that departure in a second. This one also has an interesting requirement where actually you're required to accelerate quickly. Accelerate to 250 knots. If unable, you're supposed to tell tower and departure control. Cool. Because you actually see in red a speed requirement. So you need to be hitting these speeds as you get to these different waypoints. Another thing I found rather interesting is this number 1527 in blue right there, pointing at these two things. Okay, so once again, this is the graphic description, but you also have a whole description of what you're supposed to do over here. And for example, that's 27 left and right. You are supposed to climb heading of 275 degrees to 1,527 feet. Oddly specific. I don't know where that's from Atlanta people, but whatever. Then direct SLAW, then on your depicted route to NASA. Okay, so that is a altitude that you should be going to on the heading of 275. And notice it's underlined. You're supposed to climb to that altitude, and then you continuing to SLAW right there, as you can see, then on your depicted route to NASA. Okay, the whole thing tops out at 10,000 feet. All right. And yeah, so other notes that I found of interest on this, let's look at the top. Okay, so we've got a bunch of information like, again, Atlanta departure, lots of frequencies here. We have radar available. Okay, you have your equipment requirements. This one needs RNAV 1. So if your airplane is capable of RNAV 1, it has a certain level of nav performance. You need either a DME IRU, it's inertial reference unit, or GPS, because it is an RNAV SID. We need area navigation capability. Also, you notice, note 2, this is for turbojet aircraft only, so don't use it if you're flying a turboprop or a propeller-driven aircraft, okay? You also see here, you are supposed to get your transponder code via PDC, so lots of aircraft now are able to get their transponder code with their pre-departure clearance through ACARS. I've got another video about what ACARS is, with your flight management system on the aircraft. So, and basically, I really love this. Upon receipt of ATC clearance from Atlanta Clearance Delivery, read back only your call sign and transponder code unless you have a question. Don't ask us anything unless you have a question, which is a little funny because if I have a question, yes, I'm going to ask ATC. But just say your call sign and transponder code. That's basically what they want you to do. Interestingly, and it was kind of interesting. But okay, we talked about the Atlanta departure. So this is a vector SID. They're available. But I do want to point out funny things like special instructions. Notice here's EA1, EA2. It looks like E2 or something. But then they actually tell you this is how you're supposed to pronounce these things. East 1, East 2. So I think that's interesting. They don't want you trying to pronounce them. Here you go. You're supposed to do these things. Now let's look at another type. And this I want to point out, this is Denver, okay? Some interesting and important things. This is not a vector SID, this is just a regular SID. Notice we've got it going to various points along each line. Like if I want to end up at Hayes Center VOR, I would file plane 1.hct. HCT is the VOR. This is the planes 1 departure. Okay, so I want to point out a few things about these VOR boxes. This is commonly asked on dispatcher tests. Notice these little letters and symbols inside the VOR box. Okay, we got the Morse code, that we know. Probably that's the identifier. Hopefully you guys know that by now. All right. The D means the VOR has DME. Cool. H means it's a high service volume, but then VH below, that's the new expanded service volume of the VOR. Now I'm going to put a link to a FAA PDF. It's really handy. A bunch of the service volumes explained, the new service volumes. Okay. But then in McCook, I honestly thought this was a typo until I looked it up. And the FAA has made a new DME service volume, and that is designated DH. It's kind of like weird to me though, FAA, because DH in parentheses very frequently means decision height. I was like, what's the typo? But it's not a typo. I learned something today, and I share it with you guys. VH is the service volume of the VOR. DH is the service volume of the McCook VOR's DME. Down here you have Goodland. It just says D, meaning the service volume is the same for the DME as the VOR. It's a high service volume VOR. It's not the new VH expanded high. It's just the old school high service volume VOR. Okay, cool. One other thing with the Thurman, here we have a high volume DME, but the VOR itself is only the new VL class, which is like a lower service volume VOR. So yeah, this is great. You should totally use this on a test because it's so many good things to ask on here. Haha, cool. We have our typical lines, like I mentioned, all the different transitions. You can stop at these various points, okay? I do want to point out a couple other things, though, on here. Here's the highest obstacle, 14,112 feet MSL with a big arrow. Yep. We also have other airports shown on here, these blue ones. Okay, so all of these can be using this departure. There's other gray ones shown on here just for reference information. So that's interesting. Okay. We also have a box. Everybody needs to know this, lost communications. So if you don't get any transmissions from ATC within 1 minute after departure, this is what they want you to do. Maintain your assigned heading till 7,000. Then you're going to go direct to VOR, going up to your filed altitude. Then your assigned transition. This is essentially to make sure you're not going to run into anything, because we have terrain around here. And so we have a specific lost comms box. Always take a look for those, because that's going to answer a lot of what I need to be actually doing. So hope you guys enjoyed the unpacking of lots of SIDs from Jeppesen. I realize I went super fast, so give me your comments in the video comments. I love to read them, I love to answer them, and check it out, because you can follow along. I will also post a link to a Jeppesen PDF, where is basically a legend of all this, although it's not always perfectly up to date, but still helpful information. And don't forget to check out my classes on my site, and have a fantastic day from Laura at Aviation 101 with Laura.